Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support in the recent content. Before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so, a few more teams to talk about today, right? We're going to talk about Golden State, right? Obviously, we're also going to talk about Oklahoma City, and we have another team in store for you as well. So, we're going to get started with the Golden State Warriors, and they've lost 4 in a row, and they've, lost 5 of their last 7. They've basically been a 500 team the last 10 games. And, the losses, their last couple of losses, right? A loss to the Phoenix Suns, right? And that was a game where the first half was pretty ugly for them, right? They couldn't get stops against Phoenix's offense. They were moving the ball and getting great shots. And Steph only had 2 points in the first half. He was questionable, I think, to play with, I think it's a bilateral knee tendonitis issue, right? So not the most ideal thing to play through. Second half, he was much better. And the Warriors did kind of make a comeback to try to make it a game, but it wasn't enough. The game before, they played OKC and they lost. This was a game where Steph was out. OKC was out a couple of guys, right? Because Chet Holmgren's been out. And Jalen Williams got hit in the face in the first half and didn't come back. But the 2 losses prior to those were the ones that I think were a little bit more egregious because a loss to the Brooklyn Nets and the San Antonio Spurs. And in both of those games, they had 18-point leads in the second half. And just kind of fell apart. And it's starting to maybe seem like some of the issues that we had with the team and concerns we had about the team going into the season have started to pop up, now after, a really great stretch to the season, right? I mean, they started the year off, 12-2? So, obviously every team goes through rough stretches and then they can kind of bounce back. But there still are some concerns, and the DeAnthony Melton injury, maybe that might have something to do with it, where maybe that hurt the team more than we thought, because now you don't really have another guard next to Steph that you can just kind of easily slot in as a 3-and-D guy, right? Because a lot of their other guards are a little bit more offensive oriented. And then, when you kind of look around the rest of the roster, right, then you look at the bench, and they're still playing 12, 13 guys, but now it starts to feel like that they may be searching for guys, right? Because say like Lindy Waters was starting initially, after the Melton injury, right? Because I think at the beginning of the season, they had a different group. They had the big group, right, where Kuminga was in the starting 5, and then he's been ousted out of the starting 5, coming off the bench, hasn't really played as well recently. And then, they were starting Waters. Now they're starting Pods, who wasn't playing well to begin the season either. He played better in the Suns game, but he's had a pretty rough year too so far. So, I don't know. Wiggins is playing well. Draymond's shooting the ball well. Steph's numbers are down, but some of that you just kind of expect because he's playing fewer minutes, and there's also just a lot more guys that they're trying to put out there. But I mean, what do you think? Is it more of a sign of concern, right, in terms of like the stuff we were worried about before the season? Or is it more so just kind of a slump and they're just probably going to have to take some, hits, because their schedule starts to get pretty difficult as we go on, right? Because you look at the upcoming teams that they play, they play the Denver Nuggets, and Aaron Gordon, before we got on, actually, is scheduled to play in this game that the Nuggets are about to play right before the Warriors, because they play Tuesday. Then after that, they play the Houston Rockets. They beat the Rockets earlier in the season, so that may just be a matchup they're not too worried about. Then they play Minnesota like 3 times, right? They play them twice, and then they play the Grizzlies, the Pacers, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Suns, and then they finish off December with a game against Cleveland. So pretty much every team from here on out that they play is a good team, right? You look at kind of the earlier portion of the schedule, and they play teams like Portland and Utah. They played some good teams, right? Like they played Boston, albeit a shorthanded Boston team. And then, you look at the New Orleans team, they played them with Zion and Ingram, but then a bunch of guys got hurt in that game. And then the next time they played them, the Pelicans were even more shorthanded. Then they also have the Wizards. So it's kind of a mix, but now the schedule's getting a lot harder, and now it feels like they're starting to play worse. So what do you think?
Well, I think this is kind of something that we had hinted at, like when you have this strength in numbers philosophy. I think the problem kind of speaks for itself, where you're going to have confusion. You're going to have guys who don't really necessarily know what their role is because they could be taken out at any point in the game and be replaced with somebody who does something completely different. I think a lot of the players have expressed that frustration, whether it be Curry or even like a guy like Kevon Looney. He said like at times it can get difficult to, or excuse me, it can get difficult at times to find a rhythm, kind of not knowing what to expect game to game. That's kind of crazy to hear, I think, from a potential contender. And that's kind of the thing. Like, it's an unusual situation because we don't normally see contenders kind of have that mindset. Normally, it's a solid 8 to 9 man rotation, maybe 10 at times. But when you're playing 13, 14 guys, I think the lines get blurred at times. And then, things kind of get a little chaotic. Like in the Suns game, the only Warrior with a positive plus minus off the bench was Looney. And he was like +1 in like 16 minutes or something like that. So it wasn't, crazy. So I think, opportunities are probably going to dwindle. I think that you might need to shorten it. You have to. Because I think the combinations, we've already seen this happen before. When he tried like all those combinations that one year, it didn't end too well for them. And granted, they do have a lot of options. So now would be the time to figure it out. But, I think with the way that the roster is constructed, it doesn't really give you a whole lot of leeway. You don't have a lot of star power. You have, Steph and Dre, but at the same time, I think you're expecting a lot from a bunch of guys that may not be able to provide that by themselves. Like, I think the biggest problem is Jonathan Kuminga not really living up to that expectation and living up to the hype, because I think if he could play at a really solid level alongside Wiggins and the other guys to complement Curry's game, I think you could make a case for them to make a playoff run. But with the way that he's been playing and just not really doing a whole lot through like 3 quarters at times, it's just really tough. And you do have to find that elsewhere. So he's really reaching deep into the bag. But this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning, where you can be very skeptical of it because of the fact that guys aren't going to know what they're doing at times, especially when they're losing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it seems like all the young guys, by and large, have been a little bit of a disappointment this season. Because like say, Pajemski, right, who was great as a rookie, right, he's just been bad this season. Again, he was good against the Suns, so maybe that's a sign of maybe he can kind of get things back on track. But say for like a Moses Moody, I mean, like he's just like Kaminga, right? He's in his 4th season, and they just gave him that extension. And like you mentioned, he's another one of these guys where his minutes kind of come and go. Like he played
Yeah.
basically like 2 minutes in this game, so
Yeah.
essentially like he didn't play at all, really. I mean, and then there's other games where he does kind of get some run, right? So like, if you look at his numbers on the season, he's averaging 16 minutes a game, right? And that's just, that's that's less than last season. Last season, he averaged just about 18 minutes a game, and people had, concerns about his lack of playing time at different points as well. And like, he may just not be like that great. I'm not saying he's bad, but the fact that he's in year 4 and you're still kind of like trying to figure out when and where he can play, I think is also possibly just an indictment of like the guys that they drafted. Like they like not that they're bad, but that they may not be quite as good as you would like for them to be. And like with
Yeah.
Moody, he's the 14th pick, so like he's right at the end of the lottery. So you're not really expecting a star. The Kaminga one is the bigger one, where he was a top 10 pick. I think he was 7th overall, and he was starting at the beginning of the season, and it was very clear early on that he just doesn't fit with the starters. And he was playing better off the bench, but you just look at his stats, 13 and a half points a game, 4 rebounds, a steal, but like 43% from the field, 29% from 3. Still not like a great defender, and it's just, I don't know. Like, it's starting to kind of feel like that, those young guys may just not work on this team. And but again, these were kind of the concerns we had going into the season, where if you didn't have a leap from the young guys, then who was going to be your next best player after Steph? And you still don't really have a secondary option that you can look to, right? Like
Mm-mm.
Wiggins has played well, but in this version of the NBA, like 2024 compared to 2022, it's probably a lot harder to ask him to be the number 2 guy on your team, right? So you
Yeah.
just need a little bit more. You need more talent, I think. And like you said, some of that's going to just have to stem from just cutting the rotation. But which guys' minutes are going to go away? And I think that's probably the first question. Like, which guys ultimately do you kind of cut minutes from? Like, I would think that it might be time to kind of start trimming the minutes of, say, like a Lindy Waters or like a
Yep.
like a Pat Spencer or somebody like that. But even then, is there still like a guarantee that with those guys getting more minutes, they'll play well? Because even a guy like a Buddy Hield was off to a great start at the beginning of the season, and now he's kind of cooled off. He's gone back to more human levels of shooting, right? Where like at the beginning of the season, he was giving you like 20 a game, shooting like 50% from the field and 50% from three. Now he's down to 15 a game, 46 from the field, 44 from three. Still good, but he was shooting so well at the beginning that obviously like he's not shooting 46 and 44 from the field in the last several games. He's shooting significantly worse by and large, and that's what's dragged those percentages down. And he's just not, and again, like he's a good player, but he probably wasn't what we were seeing at the beginning of the season, and that was part of what was powering the team was the bench was scoring ridiculous numbers, right? I think the bench was scoring like 60 a game, which was like the most in a very long time. And now the bench is kind of playing back to the levels of what you would probably expect. And now that's really hurting them because they just don't have enough upper end talent to really make up for that. So, aside from hopefully somebody starts playing out of their mind within the next couple of weeks, I don't know, because this could go either way. Because they could overperform like they did at the beginning of the season and start to go on a run and then, bounce back. But this is kind of a crucial stretch for them, right? This is kind of where we'll actually be able to see, where do they rank in terms of, the rest of the West. I mean, I think where there's probably at least, you know, some level of, okay, this is what they might be is I think they're better than what we expected to see going
Mm-hmm.
into the season, but probably not as good as what they looked like to begin the season. They're probably not like a top, 3 team in the Western Conference, right? But they're also probably not like a, bottom of the play-in, 11 seed or anything like that. They're like in the middle, right? Somewhere between like probably like 4 to 6 or something like that, depending on the health of certain guys. And then also just like depending on if they do any moves, because there's the potential for them to move up. But in order for them to move up, they would need to make some type of move. But there's just nothing out there right now, right? Because it's already kind of been talked about where they're kind of out on some of these possible guys. Like it just seems like they don't really want like a Zach Levine or an Ingram or something like that. And again, there could be somebody down the line that might be available. We don't know, but that's just kind of a tough spot to be in, just because of the fact that the team right now is not good enough. Even though Steph is still good, right? But you just kind of worry that if that knee becomes more of a problem, right, then there may be a scenario where he'll have to miss more time. And I just don't necessarily know if the team is as good as what they were looking like to begin the season. Like I don't think they are. But it's just kind of tough. But to be fair, like every team at some point has a rough stretch, but they also haven't really had too many issues in terms of injuries anyways. Like they did lose Melton, and that is significant. And Steph has missed a few games, but they're actually 3-1 in those games. But outside of that, everybody else has pretty much been available. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it feels like that they're kind of starting to go back down to what we probably expected, but better than that, So, are they in trouble? I mean, I don't think we expected them to be a championship level team going into the season anyway. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think it does start with trimming down the rotation. There are some guys, like you said, that probably shouldn't be playing, and then there are guys that should be playing more. I think a guy like Kyle Anderson probably helps you in the Phoenix game, but he only got 7 minutes. So that's where it's like I don't understand that philosophy. It's not like the guy was in foul trouble. I would prefer Kyle Anderson be out there than a guy like Lindy Waters or Pat Spencer. But, we're not the coaches, but still, on the outside looking in, it does look weird at times because you're practically playing the whole team. And then you look at the Phoenix game, and they've kind of had a solid rotation of guys that they can really trust. Like Monte Morris coming off the bench, Ryan Dunn as well. So a lot of guys are actually playing pretty well for them who do come off the bench consistently. And I think if you add a sense of structure and not just who has the hot hand on the bench, I think that would probably help the Warriors out. And I don't really know if they're cooked. I thought they were cooked going into the season, but I think this hot start has kind of given them a little bit of a cushion. So I'm not, completely out on them, but yeah, they might be in the fraud category.
Yeah. And like with the Suns, that was a game where, Beal and Nurkic were out. So, like you said, they were able to kind of just slide a couple of guys up in the rotation. Like the Suns have depth on their roster as well, right? But like you said, it's depth that they pretty much know what, in terms of who to put out there, like you said, right? Like there's not a guy, that's on the roster that, like will just sometimes play and then other times not. It's more so like, if a guy's hurt, then a guy will slide up, but everyone else pretty much plays pretty consistently. So,
Yes.
and that's kind of like you said, what you want from a team. Like even a team like Boston, right? They have, like you said, 8, 9 guys that they play pretty consistently, and then like maybe one other guy that, depending on the matchup, might play, and then maybe not. But
Sure.
once you get to the 10th spot, that's what you want, And they have that because they know, like you said, which guys are the key contributors and which guys are the guys that are more like the role guys, right? That can
Sure.
kind of just come in, and then their minutes may go up and down a little bit, but just in general, that's kind of how it goes. So, this is kind of one of the reasons why most teams don't normally do that. But I understand the argument of, it keeps guys fresh, right? It allows each individual guy to probably play harder for more possessions, right? But, you still need more talent. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at from them. But again, I don't think any trade is coming anytime soon, anyways, right? Like, I mean, maybe Melton, because like I think he signed as a regular free agent. So like on December 15th, I think that's the first day he could be moved. So that's like 2 weeks from now. But that may not happen, right? So like right now, like you said, the things that you can do, that you can control, is trim the rotation. But then some guys are just going to have to be better, right? Like Kuminga is going to have to be better, right? And that's a guy where he doesn't really have an excuse at this point because he's in his 4th season, right? Last year he complained that that he wasn't being utilized properly, and to his credit, he played well. But what happened now? Obviously, I mean, I'm sure he probably expected to be in the starting 5, and then I'm sure he was probably disappointed that he was demoted to the backup, but he also probably just isn't what we were hoping for, him to be, right? And like he could be like a good player contributor on another team, but probably not this one, right? Like he may just be destined to be like one of those guys that can put up points, but for like a team that's probably just like not that good, And that's not really like a bad thing. It's just for him, it's not really fair to both, right? Because for Kuminga, right, he wants his money, whatever he can get, and his value is kind of starting to drop. And then for Golden State, they need guys that can help contribute right now, right? Where there's not a whole lot of volatility from a game-to-game basis. And they're just not really getting it. So, and again, I'm not blaming one guy, right? It's not all on him, right? There's a lot of guys that are kind of at fault here. And this is kind of what happened last year, right? Like, the funny thing is, last season they got off to a great start, and then they tailed off. Then they climbed their way back, but they had to do so much that by the end, it didn't really mean anything. Although, to be fair, last year you had the Draymond stuff that was going on, and, that obviously was a factor as well, because that's one of your best players, and he was just gone for, X amount of games because of, what he did, so.
Yeah, and it's like, give him his credit this season, I think, to the point where he's been quarterbacking, alongside Steph very well. I don't think we've really seen him get into any crazy incidents, so he's kind of been on his
Just
best behavior.
Yeah, just the Zach Edey thing, that's pretty
Yeah.
much it. I mean,
Yeah.
like, all the other stuff is pretty normal.
Yeah, run of the mill stuff. But if
Yeah.
Steve Kerr was the warrior or the coach for the Suns, he would have, Bol playing like 20 plus minutes. Like that kind of logic I just really can't get behind, and I just don't think it's going to translate to championship basketball. Granted though, the roster is quite literally constructed around like it's constructed to be this way. So they kind of had it. They kind of went into this season with that in mind. So I don't know. It's weird.
In the early part of the season is where you kind of want to experiment and try to figure out who's got it and who doesn't. It's just in the Western Conference, it's just very hard to do that because, because a lot of these teams kind of have to hit the ground running, right? Because some of these teams, like say the Mavs started the year off bad, but now they're right back in it, right? Where now they're like a top 5 seed after starting the season off poorly, because now they figured some things out, right? Now also they had some injuries to some of their front court guys, but even recently they were on a streak with with Luka being out. So
Yeah.
we'll see what the Warriors can kind of do from here on out. But, they're starting to slip in the standings, and they kind of need to start pulling out some good wins here against some really good teams. Because if they don't, then they're going to drop, and by the time the month is over, they're going to be back in the play-in again.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now, we're going to move on to another team in the Western Conference, the Oklahoma City Thunder. It's been a little while since we've talked about this team. And they're still playing really well. Now, this was our pick to come out of the Western Conference. Obviously, since the last time we talked about them, right, Chet Holmgren has been out. But Isaiah Hartenstein has returned. And he's been very good for the Oklahoma City Thunder, with Chet during Chet's absence, right? Basically giving them a double-double every game. They just lost to the Houston Rockets, right, as we were recording. So, the tough loss there, and it was actually very close, a super competitive back and forth game. But either way, they're still 15-5, right? So they're still right at the top of the Western Conference, and they've been playing really well. Like I said, even with some of these guys out, because that's the other thing is that in addition to Chet Holmgren, right, Alex Caruso's out, right, and even their backup big Jalen Williams is out, right. So they haven't. So while while Hartenstein was out, they were playing very small. And they were kind of finding ways to get it done on the defensive end, and it was really impressive. You look at Isaiah Hartenstein's numbers, and he just put up 19 and 13 in this game against the Rockets. He's averaging 14 and 14 with 4 assists a game, and pretty much playing like how you would want. He's also averaging 2 blocks a game, so pretty much everything you could have asked him to do for the Oklahoma City Thunder in terms of the rebounding, in terms of the defense. The playmaking as well, which fits in with the OKC Thunder's 5-out offense. You're pretty much liking what you're seeing. And for OKC, for them, I think the thing that's kind of fascinating is in terms of their defense, they've been the number 1 defensive team in the NBA. But their three-point shooting has pretty much fallen off a cliff, right? Like this season so far, if you remember last year, they were one of the best three-point shooting teams in the NBA, right? This season, they've been significantly worse, right? The roster's pretty similar, right? It's not like the roster's significantly different from last year. So there's a lot of guys that just aren't shooting as well, right? Like they're 21st in three-point percentage, right? And that's not ideal, but then you still look at the fact that despite all that, they're still winning all these games. They're getting it done primarily on the defensive end. Even a guy like SGA now, he's taking more threes. So, there's a lot to like in terms of what we're seeing this season from OKC. Like you look at SGA's 3-point attempts now, he's up to 6 a game, not making them at a high percentage. But, it was time for him to add, more 3-point shooting to his game just because, we know he's still an effective scorer. And I don't really see a reason why he couldn't be a good 3-point shooter, even though for his career, he's a below average kind of 3-point shooter. But he can still obviously get to the mid-range, and he still gets to the free throw line a ton. Like he's still getting to the free throw line 8 times a game. And he's giving you 2 blocks, or 2 steals and a block a game. So, and then there's also just a testament to the amount of depth that they have. Because as I mentioned, they've had a number of key guys out at different points. And they just slide guys in, right? A guy like a Dylan Jones, right? Who I liked in the draft. He comes in and he, occasionally plays and gives them minutes as like a stocky, undersized, physical guy. An AJ Mitchell, right, who we didn't even really know what to expect from him. He comes in and plays relatively well. Obviously, these other guys off the bench, like, the normal guys, Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, and others, right, they're all kind of getting it done. So, in terms of OKC, I think we've seen, for the most part, about what we were kind of hoping for. We were expecting to see, a decent leap from some of these guys, and also you can't forget but mentioning Jalen Williams, right? and that was the wing guy, where he's been playing a lot of center this season, right? Obviously with Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein out for most of it. And he was getting it done, right? He was giving you over 6 rebounds a game, 5 assists, 2 steals, a block. Basically as the starting center, still shooting 50-40 from the field and from 3. So he looks really good. And Chet Holmgren, before he got hurt, was looking great by and large. So there's a lot to like from this team. It's just a matter of, obviously, this season, unlike last year, they've had much more bad luck when it comes to health. But even with some of these guys out, and Caruso obviously has been hurt, and he wasn't shooting that great anyways. But we'll see if the shooting gets back on track. There's still a ton to like from this team on both ends of the floor, right? So once the 3-point shot hopefully comes back, then they'll be clicking on even more cylinders, and then they're probably going to look even more like the team that we're hoping to see. Because there's, even despite the 3-point shooting and the injuries, they're still at the top of the West. They haven't had like a crazy, super difficult schedule, but it doesn't matter because it's still made harder by the fact that they've had guys out, including most of their new acquisitions. So we haven't even really had any games with the new guys playing with the other guys together. So we can't even really evaluate that. But from what we've seen, there's a lot to like, and they figured some things out with the small ball defensive lineups. But having Hardenstein back, now you don't have to always play small, and he fits in with what they want to do anyways, even though he's not really a 3-point shooter.
Yeah, I think this is one of the few cases, I think, in the NBA, one of the few teams where I kind of take the stats for them with kind of like a grain of salt, team wise. Like, I don't know what their rankings are, but they're a top team all around for me personally. Anytime I watch them, they get it done on both ends of the floor. You have Shea, who's still a monster on offense. Like you said, he's adding that 3-point shot to his bag, but I mean, that was kind of inevitable, right? Like, those are shots. Those are really the only kinds of shots that the defense is really kind of willing to give him. Because I mean, anything with inside the arc he's pretty much double teamed. So I think he has to add that. J Dub, he's been awesome. I think his development has been crazy to see. He's continuing, to get better and better. Tough shot maker, tough shot taker, amazing stuff from him, and defensively continues to show out. Even like the depth, I think they're kind of sneaky underrated as well. Like I really like Isaiah Joe's game. Granted, he is having a down year in terms of shooting. But Aaron Wiggins has kind of picked up the slack in terms of that great 3-point percentage. So I think they have, the pieces and definitely the system to go on a run. It's just a matter of health at this point because Chet being out definitely does not help. Caruso, your new addition, does not help. But Hartenstein is a freaking monster, and I think he changes the dynamic of this team and adds that level of physicality that we were talking about and why we gave them such a good grade for the offseason. Like, versus the Lakers, he was a straight up bully and also was amazing on defense as well. So I like everything that they've done throughout the entire season. They're taking all the right steps in the right direction, except for health. That's the only thing I would say that kind of is making me a little uneasy, but at the same time, they still look great when all those guys are out there.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like where you mentioned, because they had an NBA Cup game against LA, and like you said, Hardenstein was out there, and he was, at times causing some issues in terms of getting offensive rebounds, getting some blocks out there. And then like I said, it's nice to have more versatility now because they're not a good rebounding team, but obviously Hartenstein is a great rebounder. And then obviously when Chet Holmgren comes back, he's a pretty good rebounder, even though he's not like a big physical guy, right? He's got long arms and height. So, there's a lot to like there. And again, like just the fact that they can, now they don't always have to play super small. Like they're still good at it, but now they have more versatility there. Because like, say against the Lakers, some of those small lineups were really causing the Lakers problems where, despite AD, being out there even against the big, the smaller OKC lineups, they couldn't really get him the ball. And then when they tried to move the ball around, they forced them into a lot of turnovers. Because OKC, averages basically like, forces 20 turnovers a game, which is, that's basically like 2K numbers essentially, right? And almost every time, you turn the ball over to them, and not all of those are live ball turnovers, obviously, but, when they get those stops, they're great in transition just because they have a lot of great athletes, that can pretty much get anywhere they want to on the floor. So, I mean, they're number one in steals. They average 12 steals a game. So then those are the live ball turnovers, for example, right? So like they average 12 steals, right around 7 blocks. So, I mean, pretty much if you're looking at, what we call stocks, which are steals and blocks, they're first and third respectively. So, I mean, they're basically a top 5 team on that end of the floor. It's just
Yeah.
again, the problem is the rebounding. The three-point shooting is going to have to improve. I think it would still be kind of nice if they could kind of turn to somebody in the second unit for some offense. Obviously, you can stagger the minutes and just kind of, just be like, all right, Jalen, you're going to get your own unit, right? Obviously, when Chet comes back, he can probably have a two-man game there. So that would be nice to have. But like you said, the pieces they have in place right now are as good as what we've seen from pretty much anybody in the Western Conference. It just would be nice if at some point they could get healthy because I think, we want to see what it looks like when they have all their guys together, which again is not always easy to do because, a lot of the times you don't have your team fully available over the course of the season. But I at least want to see like all their main guys available. What does the starting group look like? What does the second unit look like? Because I do kind of want to see like, do they actually go with a two big lineup, or do they just kind of roll with Chet's the starting center or Hartenstein's the backup center? It could just depend
Yeah.
on the matchup, but I want to see that. So hopefully those guys can get healthy pretty
Yeah, I'm
soon.
curious about that too. And like I don't know. I just think they're too good for me to really feel bad about them, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Like they have so
Yeah, it's
many
kind of
pieces. Like yeah, it goes on and on and on. Like their depth is really serious, but we'll see.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why with guy even without with guys missing time, they're still able to win.
Yeah.
Right? And we've talked about you need depth, over the course of the regular season. And that's one of the reasons why, like say like a team like Golden State has depth as well. They just with OKC they have more higher end talent, because say with Golden State after Steph, there's a little bit of a drop off. Like Draymond's the next best guy, but he's not, he's not an offensive player in terms of you're not looking to him for scoring. You're looking to him for defense and playmaking primarily.
Right. Yeah.
But with OKC, you got two guys that can basically give you over 20 a game. One guy which can get you basically 30.
Yeah.
So, and then after that, a bevy of other guys, in that lineup. So, there's a
Hmm.
lot to like there. For the third team, we didn't mention it, but now we're gonna have to mention it. The Minnesota Timberwolves. So they did get a win. In fairness, they did get a win over the Clippers in the Cup game. It was ugly. It was back and forth. And defensively, they did look a lot better, which, obviously after their previous loss, Edwards was calling out the team and saying that the team was soft and that they, and that everybody, including himself, needed to be better. But it's so bizarre because, they did win their last game, and hopefully we'll see if that can kind of spark a run for them because they will play the Lakers, same day this episode comes out. And then they're also going to play the Clippers again, and then they're going to play some other teams like Golden State. But they're still 3-7 in their last 10, and they just haven't really looked the part to me so far this season. And we've talked about it at different points where there's pieces where you can't quite figure out what the deal is. I mean, some of it, to be fair, is just there are some key guys that are just not playing well, right? Like Edwards, by and large, has played very well. 3-point shooting's been really good. Randall's been good. A lot. There was a clip kind of going around where towards the end of that Clippers game, or at different points, you could see like his body language, right? And people mentioned that, and people brought that up when he was a Knick as well, right? So I guess that's a concern kind of. But then you look around and say like a Jaden McDaniels, just not really having a great season, honestly. Yeah, I mean, obviously he was better against the Clippers, right? 11 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists. But, the game before that against Sacramento, right? Not necessarily like the greatest defensive team in the world. He did not score at all. And he only took 3 shots. And he was basically, benched by the end of the game, right? Like Nikhil Alexander Walker pretty much took his spot. DiVincenzo, shooting just hasn't really been there necessarily this season. He did shoot better from three against the Clippers, right? And the Clippers have been a very good defensive team, but his numbers are way down from last season, right? And like, you expected some of his numbers to drop just because, it's different personnel, but the efficiency is also pretty awful, right? Like last season, he was around 16 a game, 4 rebounds and 3 assists. Now he's down to like 9 a game, but 35 from the field and 33 from three, right? Which is a little bit concerning. Last year was a career year for him, So maybe it could just be maybe he wasn't quite as good as what we thought, or he could just be in a super long slump that maybe he's starting to get out of. Um, you know, Mike Conley, right? He's been better in these last couple of games, right? Because he had missed a decent amount of time, I think, with an injury, but he had gotten off to a pretty rough start in the season. And I think it's pretty clear that they kind of need him out there because they don't really have anybody on the roster like him. Rob Dillingham, they drafted him, but he just doesn't play when all their guys are available, right? So I guess he's just kind of more of a long term project at this point. And Nas Reed, right? Like, he's been a little up and down, but you can also see like that there are spots where because of his 3-point shooting, because he's shooting 37% from three. And there are kind of spots where you kind of wish like, oh, this might be a game where like you want to close like with, him instead of Randall or like him instead of Gobert. And it feels like they're just not really quite sure what to do there, because like, say like with Gobert, that's your best defensive big, as a rim protector and rebounder. And the team as a whole just has not been as good defensively this year, right? Like last season, we talked about it. They were the number one defensive team. And, now they've gotten up to 10th, right? But that's up to 10th. And that's obviously down from number one last year. And they were the number one defensive team by a wide margin. And now the offense has dropped because they were like a top 10 offense maybe a week or so ago. But since they've gone through this horrific stretch, now they're down to 17th, which is actually worse than last season. So on both ends of the floor, at least recently, right? And part of that is just precipitated by the recent stretch. Now they're worse on both ends of the floor than they were last season. So that's kind of a problem. And I don't really know what you can necessarily do about that other than I think some guys are probably just going to have to be better because as of right now, there's not really anything you can really do to kind of, upgrade the roster because I just don't think there's going to be any deals that are going to be made necessarily anytime soon. And I think they would still probably like to get a look at some of these guys before they make a decision. I don't know. And to be honest, I didn't really expect Dillingham to not play this season. Like he's gotten minutes when guys have been out, but when they have their full group of guys, he just doesn't play at all. So that's something I'm a little disappointed by. But I guess I understand, like, as a rookie, okay, whatever. And like, they do need more defense. But I don't know. I'm like, hopefully this Clippers win can kind of get them back on track, right? And the Clippers, to be fair, like, they're not a great team, but they're a decent team, right? And they're certainly playing better than they have played, than we expected going into the season, even with some injuries, right? Because, like, Norman Powell's been hurt, right? Obviously, Kawhi's been out. So, they're kind of scrambling and looking for guys. But I just have been very disappointed by the Timberwolves this season. And they're probably all the way up there in terms of like most disappointing team. Obviously, the Sixers, I guess you can say they're number one. But so much of that has to do with injuries, right? But the Timberwolves are right there. And they don't really have the excuse, in my opinion, to be, to be where they are right now. But again, there's still plenty of time left for them to catch up. But I'm kind of concerned that this team may just not be that great this season. But I think we kind of talked about it going into the season where I don't think either of us really expected the Timberwolves to come out of the West. Maybe we thought they could compete. But I think we kind of looked at it as, okay, this is a move that's probably, these moves that they made are kind of built for the future, but probably not necessarily this season. But it's still disappointing to see them take a step back, especially when you have, Edwards on your team. You would like to kind of see them play better and make a push. And, again, there's still time, but you're also 20 games in, and they haven't really had any major losses to their roster. So it could just be that they're just not that good. Like, and I'm sure, and they'll be better. Like, I don't think they'll be 11th in the West, but I'm kind of at the point where I don't really expect them to be, one of the top teams in the West. But I think record wise, they'll be better. But I don't really see them making a deep run this year.
Yeah. A couple of glaring issues for me. Number one is the chemistry. It is not there at all on either end of the floor. I think if you watched and like you already hinted at it about clips and stuff that have come out, like Julius Randle and Gobert are not on the same page defensively. And I think Gobert is just might be completely oblivious to what's going on offensively as well. Like there's times when he's completely looking guys off, and he's done that previously in his career, but there's times where you kind of need to make that extra swing, but he decides to go up with like a crazy hook or something like that. But, overall, from what I've seen from them, very disappointed. Not from in Anthony Edwards, to be honest. I've really liked what I've seen from him. I think his play has been pretty freaking good. Julius Randle, too, offensively as well. But defensively, they have just fallen off the map for me. And I think when you lose your identity like that, it hurts. And I don't think you can really climb out of that, considering that you don't have Towns anymore. And I know it's kind of crazy because Towns wasn't really a great defender, but I think they made it work. They made it work because of the size and the system. But it's completely different. It looks devoid of all success that we saw last year. And the other thing that kind of is irking me is the depth and I guess lack thereof. It seems like the go-to guys off the bench are Naz Reid, DiVincenzo, and Nikhil Alexander-Walker. I think those are three solid players, but I think you need a little bit more. And it would help to get some Rob Dillingham minutes because I think in the times that he's played, he hasn't been horrible. When he has the
No,
ball.
not at all.
Yeah, when he has the ball, but without it and defensively, yeah, no shot. But I think there are some opportunities that need to be opened up to give guys some minutes because even looking around, like, what about Leonard Miller? Do we believe in him? I don't think you can really put the Garza out there, Terrence Shannon Jr. So it kind of goes back to this is the roster that you guys kind of have. You kind of have to deal with it. And I guess you were kind of hoping that Jaden McDaniels would look a little bit better offensively. Conley's regression has been dark, I think. Rudy Gobert, never really been an offensive guy, but just on both ends of the floor, very, very underwhelming for me personally. But I think it's chemistry and depth and lack of both of those things really that are kind of affecting the team. And I think you probably won't remedy that until next season. So not that the season's a wash, but just don't expect to go to the conference finals again.
Yeah. And like I said, to be honest, I wasn't really banking on them going to the conference finals before they even made their moves.
No.
But, you still felt like, okay, they made the conference finals, so, like, they should still be a good team. But it's funny because when they first made the trade, right, like, we weren't huge fans of the trade for either team, but I think we still liked it more for the Knicks because we felt like, Towns is your best player or is the best player in that deal. And also the Knicks had literally no center. So, it's not like the ideal thing to do, but you kind of had to do it in terms of like, that was your best option at that point. So, and no other guy has come up, right, in terms of bigs that the Knicks could realistically trade for. And, again, they've been playing better as of late, right? So like their record is still, not amazing, but, they're 12-8 and now they're, kind of in that top 5 of the Eastern Conference. And it, I don't really see a reason for them to completely drop, even though the defense hasn't been great. But, for the Wolves, you're in the West, so your starting point is already probably tougher anyways. But you would kind of think that, they would have more of an advantage because, again, they were one of the best teams in the West just last season. Even though they did make a big trade, you still have your best player. And you still have some, plenty of other guys from last season. But like you said, and as we talked about, right? Like we said, this would be a different team where now you don't have, the 3 7-footers. Well, Reed isn't 7 feet, but you know what I mean? Like you don't have 3 centers to just kind of put out there. Yeah, exactly. At different points. And now you're smaller, you're not quite as good defensively, and you're still kind of, relying on, the Mike Conley point guard production, right? Because, late in games, if it's not Mike Conley kind of figuring out ways to organize the offense, right, then it ends up kind of being Edwards and Randall ISOs, right? Which, sometimes that can work, but you'd like to have at least a little bit more than that at different points in the game, right? So, it just feels like right now it doesn't look good, and it could get better. But, again, I'm not anticipating that they're going to make like a big run this season. It just doesn't feel like it. But, again, you're still 20 games in, but they need to make a push now, right? Because if they don't make the push now, especially after, the meeting that they had or, the comments from Anthony Edwards, then it's just not going to happen, right? And, again, you look at their stretch of, their next stretch, right, over the course of this month. And, again, you play the Lakers. They did lose to the Lakers the previous matchup, but this is, the Lakers will be on a back-to-back. So you should be able to, and, they might be shorthanded. considering they're shorthanded against the Jazz. And then after that, they play the Clippers again, who they just beat. Then they play the Warriors twice. Then they play the Knicks. Then they play the Warriors again. Then they play the Hawks, and then the Mavs, and then the Rockets, and then the Spurs and OKC. So you have a pretty decent mix of solid teams in there. So, but again, kind of like Golden State, by the end of this month, we'll have a pretty good idea of like, did what Edwards talk about fix the issues of the team, and are other guys playing better, or is it just kind of just meant to be just like you said, sort of an L of a season,
Yeah, like
like
I
a
don't think
step
I don't
back?
think it's a wash. It's not a wash by
Right,
any means,
right,
but because you are still getting some great production from Ant, which is awesome. I think Julius Randle can potentially fit your team long term. It's just the other surrounding pieces. What's going to happen with Conley?
right.
Jaden McDaniels, do we see something better from him next season or later on in the season? Does he have a rebound, bounce back, whatever the case may be? I think those are kind of the biggest questions to be answered.
Yeah, and that's kind of the rough part in terms of the depth, anyways, like you mentioned, right? Because Edwards and Randall, by and large, have played well, and you're still below 500.
Yeah, right.
So, and it's not like they've had the toughest schedule in the world, right? And you look around, and the big part that's really concerning, that's killing them, is these losses to teams that aren't even really that good,
Right,
right? Because
right.
like they lost to Portland twice. Both of
Toronto.
those games, yeah, yeah, exactly. They lost to Portland twice, and both of those weren't even really that close. Like you mentioned, they lost to the Toronto Raptors.
Yeah.
They lost to, I want to say they lost to the Spurs, I think, early, and that was like when the Spurs weren't playing quite as well.
That was in
And
November,
then,
right?
yeah, exactly. That
Yeah.
was like early November. That was like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first week of the season.
Yeah.
And then they lost to the Kings in one of those games where I think the Kings were kind of shorthanded, right? Like Jay Crowder, right, was like
Yeah, yeah.
basically called up. They just signed him, and he was starting, and because I think DeRozan was out. So I don't know. Like it's really disappointing, and I my hope is that it gets better, and I think it will get better. But will it get better enough to make me go back to feel like, all right, now this team is one of the best teams in the West? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's tough to say, but I think it starts with the defense has to get better, and some of these guys just can't be as bad as or as inconsistent as they've been. But I don't know if it's good. Like I don't know if Jaden McDaniels is going to be that much better. You know what I mean?
Probably
Like
not.
he's just not. It seems like offensively, he's just probably never really going to get to that next level, right? Kind of like how we talked about last season, right when they're playing the Mavs, where like a guy like a Jaden McDaniels doesn't really punish you offensively, right? But like
Yeah.
against the Suns, he couldn't miss and looked
Right,
like
right.
Kevin Durant Jr., right? Where it was like, what was it? It was Edwards that mentioned, they have Durant, we got Jaden McDaniels, right? But then
Yeah.
as the playoffs went on, you know, once you got to the Mavs series, the offense for him kind of started to go away. And I feel like that's probably the guy in the starting five that you would kind of like to be, a guy that you could turn to a little bit more on offense, but you can't because that's just not really his game and it's not his role. But since he's getting paid so much, I think it needs to be. Like, you're not asking him to be Kevin Durant, but I think you're asking for, like, more than the occasion, like where like a double digit scoring game is a good game for him. You know what I mean? Like 10 points is a good game for him offensively, essentially. And I feel
Yeah.
like that needs to be better, especially in terms of the shooting too, because that part just the year when he got paid, he shot like 40% from three, and the last couple of seasons, there's been a drop off, and it's disappointing just because I feel like when he's playing well on both ends of the floor, not just on defense, it just it makes them look a lot better because it kind of helps not necessarily solve, but it certainly helps lower some of the offensive problems that they would have. But it seems like he's probably just not going to be that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Do you think
But yeah,
no, go ahead.
yeah, but you would hope that some other guys could kind of make up for it. But go on.
Do you think that the Minnesota Timberwolves pulled the trigger too quickly on the Towns trade, or do you think it was the right move to get off that contract ASAP?
It's tough because I think I feel like we were surprised that they did it this early because I think we kind of felt like long term you were probably going to have to move on from Towns, not even because he was bad, but just mainly because like the roster initially when they got Gobert, it seemed like it was a move designed to kind of optimize Karl Anthony Towns, right? When it was Edwards that was kind of on the come up. right? So I think that's probably, kind of what we were thinking. But I think the thought process was you just went to the Western Conference Finals. So why not give it, another year? I think we were kind of surprised that it happened this quickly. That's kind of the main issue, I think. Because I think because I feel like if we had been in a position where, they did it like maybe midway through this season or say like next off season, I think, which is what we were kind of talking about, then it wouldn't have been that much of a shocker, right? Possibly, depending on how their season would have gone. But considering that they did it right after, and it was also like right after you had a bad series, like you were like, oh, okay. But it's still surprising. But I think at the end of the day, I still think it was also financial with the new CBA. I just don't think they were comfortable paying him, all that money because it just seemed, because it was going to limit what they were going to do long term. But he's still really good. I think that's kind of the tough part, right? And it seems like what we're kind of learning now is that like a lot of these teams are going to have to probably make some of these type of tough decisions where you're not going to, where you're going to have to kind of like move on from some guys that you want to have around long term, because it might just be better financially for the team. So I think that's kind of the tough part to say there. So, I mean, I think it's just mainly that if you were going to make the trade, I feel like it just was a little bit I was a little bit disappointed that it ended up being for Julius Randle. And again, it's not has nothing to do with Randle being bad. I just
Right,
feel
right.
like if you were going to move Towns, it would have been nice to have probably kind of brought in maybe a guy that's a little bit easier to fit in. But I at least understand the argument of the playmaking, the scoring. It makes your lineup more traditional because you have a four out there instead of a five. But he's also still really good. Like he was probably still the best player that you could have moved Towns for. So it's more so just like, this is the team that they have right now, but this is probably going to take a little while, right? In terms of like getting back to where they were because, this doesn't look like like a championship level team right now. Like, does it to you? Because to me, right now, it doesn't. But I think the concern, anyways, was okay, it's Edwards, and then it's Randall, and then after that, what are you going to get? And, I think we were expecting and hoping more from some of the other additional pieces, like a DiVincenzo, and a Rob Dillingham and others, but we're just not getting it. So, if we're not getting it now, hopefully we get it later. But I don't know. It's kind of a long-winded response, but it's just kind of tough because I understand why they did it.
Mhm.
It's just, you know, I would have probably preferred to have given it another season. But I
Sure.
understand again the crunch in terms of the new CBA, and there was probably pressure to make a move now and kind of like get out of the financial position that they were gonna be in, right?
Sure.
Because it probably would have been harder to trade him once you're another season in and he's making even more money than he was making right now. Because by the end of his deal, he's gonna be like somewhere around close to 60 million or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the issue you were putting yourself in. It's just rough because it feels like that they kind of and like you said, like it's not like a completely lost season, but it feels like they gave away a season of, a possible contending year with Edwards for, this move. Like it just kind of feels like that this season is just not going to happen, and that kind of stinks when you have, like one of the rising superstars in the NBA. And that's the tough part because it does feel like that at the very least. And that's where like maybe they made a mistake, but I would at least need to see what it looks like once the season's over. Do they re-sign him in free agency? Do they move him again? I don't know. So that's kind of what I'm waiting to see. So it's still probably too early, but right now, the return on investment is not the greatest, but it's not too much as much because of Randall. It's just, the combination of not getting a ton from DiVincenzo and also just not getting a lot from really anyone else outside of your main guys, just it really hurts on either end. So that's the part that I didn't see coming. Like I thought they'd be worse on defense, but not so much worse, that they don't even look like, that much of a contending team anymore. So, that hopefully we'll see them get back to it. But, it starts with hopefully after the Edwards thing, maybe guys will kind of pick their play up. So we'll see. Because obviously they got to win against the Clippers. Could have easily lost that game. But they did compete better on the defensive end. But I need to see more. So that's kind of
Yeah.
where I'm at.
Yeah, I was just curious because, we're 20 games into the season. I know, down the line we'll probably do like an episode where we kind of revisit some off-season moves and stuff like that. But, for the time being, I feel like it is kind of an interesting topic, considering, the change in ownership potentially. Also
Yeah.
with the Minnesota Timberwolves, like, is that taking a toll on them? I don't know, but they just don't look right at all. And I know it's a big switch up between Julius Randle and Karl Anthony Towns, and then trying to integrate a guy like DiVincenzo into the fray, but in my opinion, I don't think it should look this bad.
Right. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
And then just a quick NBA Cup update. So, now we're getting, we're getting towards the end of the NBA Cup now, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
obviously, once you get to December 10th, right? That's the quarterfinals, right? And then obviously the 14th, and the 17th are the two games, the semifinals and the finals in Vegas. So pretty much just a couple weeks left. And, we do have a couple of groups that have, or teams that have clinched their groups. Atlanta has clinched Group C, right? Which was not really what I was expecting, but, they were able to beat the Celtics and they were also able to beat Cleveland. So that helped them. Houston also clinched Group A in the West, right? So they obviously did really well in their cup games, right? Because I believe, they were able to take care of the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? And I
Yeah.
think who was the other team that they ended up? I guess they're unbeaten, right? In the cup
Yeah.
games, if I'm
Yeah,
not.
I think they
Yeah,
are.
yeah, exactly. And then Golden State clinched Group C, right? Because obviously they got their wins over the Mavs. I believe they also beat the New Orleans Pelicans as well, right? And then there's another team that, for whatever reason, off the top of my head, I can't quite remember them playing. But there's still some other groups that are left, right? Obviously, the Indiana Pacers, they've been eliminated, so we're not gonna, see them, go back. And then the Lakers are not eliminated, but pretty close to being eliminated because of the point differential, and they've dropped to 2-2. So we're probably not gonna get a defending in season or defending NBA Cup crown there, right?
Yeah.
So probably not getting that. So there's still some teams that are left, but the cup is heating up, right? Because obviously in Group A you have the Magic and the Knicks, right? That are both 3-0, and I believe they play each other next, right? So that game will probably determine who's going to clinch that group. And
Yeah.
then in East B, right, I believe you have the Bucks and the Pistons. They're both undefeated. And then West B is the other one. That's the one with like the Suns, the Thunder, the Spurs, the Lakers, and the Jazz. Obviously, the Jazz have been gone, and the Lakers are close to being gone. And then I think you have the Suns and the Spurs that are going to be playing each other, and that'll probably determine, that one, right? Because the Spurs, I think, right now are at the top of Group B because they
Yes.
beat OKC. So if they beat the Suns, then they'll probably clinch that group.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what happens there. But a little bit different of a cup situation this time around, right? Because obviously, the Warriors, which that was my pick, right? They're still in this mix because they've clinched the group. But some of these other teams I think are a little bit more of a surprise, right? Teams like the Spurs, teams like Atlanta for sure, and then even like Orlando without Palo, right? And then Houston. Some of these results are a little bit more surprising, but I guess that's kind of the cool thing about the NBA Cup is that because it's not the playoffs and the championship, right? It's not the same. So technically, any team can kind of, if they make a run and get hot in these games, they could pull it out. And it's nice to see some of these teams actually trying to take the cup games seriously.
Yeah, if the cup does continue, for the foreseeable future, I think it is kind of cool that, one of the marketing points is potentially going to be the parity because, like, who will be the first one to go back to back and stuff like that because, the regular season is so different than the postseason. So guys are going to play it differently. And I can't remember who it was. I think it was somebody on Dallas. I think it was PJ Washington. I think he was like the one who actually said, like, yeah, we're
Yeah.
actively trying to go. So it is kind of cool to hear, players be somewhat intrigued and somewhat incentivized to win a trophy like this. And I think it has potential. I just kind of want to see it grow even more. But I think the parity is going to be really cool. Like if it's a different champion every year, that'll be sick.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you get the ring or yeah, you get the whatever it is. I guess the rings, you get the banner and you can hang it up. So, we might actually get to see, a
Oh
team
boy.
like, you might get a team like the Spurs, right, that gets to hang up, the in-season tournament banner, in their arena, right? Or some of these other
Yeah.
teams, and that's,
Yeah.
it's it's a nice thing. Unfortunately, the Lakers don't get two, but they did get the inaugural one. So
Yeah.
congrats to them, and we'll see who pulls it out this year. Because again, the cup, pretty cool idea, honestly. If I do say so myself, and
Yeah,
I
I
think
agree.
we were both in on the cup madness early on,
Hmm.
right? I think we were both pretty big supporters of it, and after seeing it for a year plus, you know, I think it's still really cool to see. It's just for some of the older teams, you may have a scenario where it's like, you know, they want to win these games, and then maybe that might kind of, I don't know, that might be like too much energy to expend, and then by the time you're out of it, right, then you might have some issues possibly there. But they also count as regular season games anyway, so you can't necessarily just completely be like, we don't care.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't necessarily just completely do that because then you're going to basically tank your record, right? Like, say for a team like Utah, who clearly has not much interest in winning, right? It doesn't really hurt them. If anything, it helps them,
Hmm.
right? But for like some of these other teams, like say, especially the teams out west, you don't want to just drop cup games for no reason because that's going to really hurt you in the standings. So even a team. So for a team like Houston, who's undefeated in the cup, that's great because that's 3 extra wins that they get to have. Whereas if they didn't have them, they'd be a little bit lower in the standings, right?
Yeah, right.
Because they're 14. And again, like you could just say they're regular season games, but in a lot of these cup games, there's definitely a more competitive feel to them than a typical regular season game. And there's always like even before the cup, there were always good regular season games, but just the cup games, a lot of them have have a really good feel to them, especially when it's like two teams that are kind of at similar levels. But even then, like when it feels like a team is mismatched and like, the team is clearly trying to win, and then like they'll fight back to try to, make that point differential not quite as bad because we've seen that before, right? Like, say, the Laker game against the Jazz where Dalton Connect has 37, the Lakers are up 20 something in the fourth, and then the Jazz pretty much cut most of the lead so that way the point differential doesn't look as bad. And that ended up kind of hurting LA, right? Because if they had kept that big lead, right, their point differential, even though they're 2-2, wouldn't be quite as bad, right? Because then you could balance out the Phoenix blowout loss with the Utah blowout win, right? But instead you have a close loss, a blowout loss, and then two close-ish wins, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how you have to look at that.
Yeah, I mean, like it's cool. I will say I think I enjoyed it last year a little bit more than this year, probably
What's the
because it was
difference?
the first. I don't know. I think, granted, this might be a hot take, but I think the intensity that I saw last year might have been a little bit more.
Okay.
It might have been like more like amped up, even though majority of the ones that I've watched this year have been pretty. The atmosphere has been pretty wild, but the ones that I saw last year, I don't know, they just had a different feel to it. I even know like some people were confused, like players included were confused about it last year, which is the funny part. Um, so I guess this year probably would have been more structure and they really would have been knowing what they're playing for. But I don't know. Maybe when it comes down to like, the knockout rounds and stuff like that, where it's like, we're going to Vegas and stuff, we might see it turn up even more. But I am curious how that's going to look. But last year I enjoyed it a little bit more. I will say that. That hasn't taken a step backwards though.
Right. And I get that because, like, you did have some games that were really down to the wire, even more
Yeah.
so last than this season. But
Mm-hmm.
there's still been some games here and there. I guess, like, the injuries, I think, is the other part that hasn't helped because some of these teams just have not had their guys available, right? Like, a couple of the Suns uh, Cup games, I think, that was during the stretch where a bunch of their guys were out. Like, they are 2-1, right? But I think the first one that they were in, right, that was one where, like, most of their guys were out. So they just had no shot. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So
Yeah.
that might be kind of where it's coming from too, because we had a
True.
lot of guys that were out so far this season due to injury at different points. So
True.
that could be part of it too.
Yeah. Very true.
So now we're gonna close it out with the NBA rumors. So there's a couple of teams, not really much of a surprise, that have some trade rumors and trade targets going on. The Utah Jazz and the Brooklyn Nets, right? For the Jazz, mainly John Collins, Jordan Clarkson, and Colin Sexton, right? Which makes sense. Those are veteran-ish guys, right? And those are guys that probably on other teams could be pretty helpful, right? Of those three, you know, I don't know because the Collins one, because his contract is so big, I feel like that one is probably going to be the toughest to deal. Although, like, to be fair, like, he has been, I think, better this season, right? Like, if you look at his numbers, he's giving you 18 and 9, 54 from the field, 35 from three, you know, just under a block a game. And, like, the Utah team as a whole has been a mess. But, you know, this season, like, it feels like, you know, he's been fine. And he's actually shooting 95% from the free throw line. And like Utah's rotation has been kind of funky at times, right? Because like, you know, they're doing the three bigs thing like they were doing last year. And initially, right, Collins, I don't think was starting, right? Because they had Taylor Hendricks out there. But with his season, obviously, unfortunately, ending because of the leg injury, right? That put Collins back into the starting five. Um, and he's still like a solid player. It's just again, he makes like what 25 million a year. So, you know, and he's got 2 years left, including I think the second year's a player option. So that one I think may be a little bit tougher to move. But, you know, Sexton and Clarkson, you know, the Clarkson one, because, you know, he's a veteran guy that's already been on some playoff teams, right? I would think he wouldn't be too difficult to move. I mean, he's at what, 14 million this year, 14 million next year. That's not a crazy amount of money. Sexton's at 18 and 19. I just don't know realistically like what team would he be going to, right? Because Clarkson could just be any team that needs like a backup scoring guard off the bench. But the other two I think is a little bit tougher to figure out. And then the Nets, they just mentioned like everybody's available, right? Which again isn't a shocker because, you know, unlike the Jazz, the Nets actually have started off pretty good this year, despite you know, guys being in and out of the team every game. So, but now, you know, they just lost, you know, what, a couple games in a row to the Magic, right? And you know, their run is probably getting ready to end. And they don't want to be good anyways, right? Like ideally for them, they need to kind of move some of these guys, get whatever they can, so that way they can get, you know, a top draft pick, right? Because some of these guys don't really need to be on this Brooklyn Nets team. Like they're just
Mhm.
probably better suited for helping out contenders, right? Like a guy like a Cam Johnson, or like a Dorian Finney-Smith, or you know anyone on, you know, any guy on this roster that's like, you know, age wise probably like mid late 20s or later, right? Or like a Dennis Schroeder.
Mhm.
Simmons, I think, is a free agent too, but again, because he's got 40 million this last year of the deal, I think that's just going to be very difficult to deal. So he's probably stuck there, which is wild because he's honestly been playing pretty solid basketball this season for the Brooklyn Nets. Like obviously his numbers aren't really, you know, what they used to be, but in the games that I've seen, like, you know, he's had some pretty solid games. Like against the Suns, he played pretty well. Part of that's probably because it's a contract year, honestly. So I'm sure he wants to make sure that he gets good enough numbers. But and again, you're not going to get the old Ben Simmons back, but he doesn't look like the complete, you know, dumpster fire that he was like the last couple of seasons before. He still has the injury concerns, but he's, I don't know. I doubt he gets traded. Like unless there's a
Yeah.
team that's got 40 million worth of salary to unload, or maybe if he's a buyout guy. But even then, not a lot of teams can sign him because of that big contract because the CBA rules are different now. But what do you think of all these guys? Oh, and Bogdanovich for the Nets is too. But what do you think of all these guys? And also for the Nets, to be fair, they also don't want to take on long-term money because they could have a bunch of cap space in the
Yeah.
offseason. Brian Windhorst mentioned they could have up to 70 million if they play their cards right and get
Yeah,
these
they need
deals.
to. Yeah, they need to clean the house. In terms of Brooklyn, I think that's the smartest thing to do. You have a ton of assets now. You can get even more. Like you said, the cap space. So pretty much just get rid of anybody who has any sort of value and could be flipped. You know, to wherever. I think as long as they do a smart deal for any of these guys, it's a good move for me. Same thing with Utah, to be honest. Like you said, a little bit less flexibility, but still similar situation where they want to be as bad as possible and also move off of some guys that clearly do not fit the timeline anymore. I agree with you. I think Colin Sexton will probably stay put, and I definitely think Jordan Clarkson and or John Collins could be moved as well because I just don't think they really fit. Um, the team's timeline as well. So I think there could be potential for both those guys to be moved. Probably more likely Jordan Clarkson because of what he can bring, the experience, age, all that stuff.
Yeah. If you're a team, like, which of those three guys would you be the most interested? I mean, I guess it depends on like what your needs are for a team.
Yeah.
But like, say if you're like, I don't know, a good team, like, would you take a
Okay.
flyer on Colin Sexton? Like, and say like if you want,
Mm.
and like if you needed an upgrade at the guard spot, he's obviously like not an elite guard, But say like if you needed a guard, that's better than what you had, would you actually take a flyer on him?
Colin Sexton. It depends on what I'm gonna be giving up too.
Right.
I guess if the price is right, why not? Let's do it. But
Hmm.
if it's too steep and Ainge is weird, I don't know. But um, I mean, I like the skill set that he brings. It's just undersized guard and pretty much a scorer. But why not? I think a team that like is a good one that is also struggling and lacking in some of the areas that he can bring to you. I think why not? Why not do that?
Hmm. Yeah, it's just, and then after that, obviously, then the question is like, which teams, does he even make
Yeah,
sense for? And that's kind of, I think, the tougher question to kind of figure out. I mean, like, if you don't have great guard play, I mean, if you don't have great guard play, you probably have an issue anyways, right? Like, I mean, there's
probably
not
not a
really a
good
lot.
team.
Yeah, there's not really a lot of teams that don't have good guard play and are good. But maybe like if you need a guard that can, like you said, that has a skill set like his, where he can get to the paint and he can kind of finish around there, even though he's undersized. Because like say, for some of these teams where like if you have more perimeter oriented guys, maybe you want more of like an attacking guard, right? But again, it's kind of, I don't know. I just don't. It's just like I'm almost prepared that there may not be that huge of a trade deadline. I mean, there could be, but it's like last year I feel like the trade deadline was outside of the Dallas moves kind of a dud. I guess like the Knicks one ended up being bigger because it kind of helped precipitate the moves that they made later. But I don't. Again, it's like what we talked about before, where it might not be stars that get moved. It might just be like these other tier guys that get moved, like guys that could help a team, but they're not necessarily stars, right? Like
Yeah,
Sexton, like he's a good player, but probably not going to get to the levels that maybe some people envisioned when he first, got into the league. Because like there was a stretch where he looked like he might be really really good, and it's not that
yeah,
he's not good, but he might be destined more to be like on a good team, like a guard off the bench, or like maybe like a team where like we can get away with having him at guard because we have somebody else like at the wing or in the front court that's that's got playmaking facilitating abilities, or something like that. So we'll
yeah,
see.
yeah. I think he has value
um
though.
yeah, exactly. I think he could help a team. It's just a matter of where is he going. I don't know. So,
Yeah.
and then after that, we got a big thing with Brandon Ingram, where he changed his agency. So he's signing with Clutch Sports. And according to ESPN, it doesn't seem like that New Orleans and him are close on a contract, and that could also precipitate. And that's probably what precipitated what was going on, right? Like Sham Charania put that out of ESPN, and there's no contract extension, and they weren't able to get a trade done. So that's probably where this is coming from, right? From the perspective of, all right, now he's changing his agent, and maybe Clutch will find a way to get it done. So I don't know, because I don't know where this goes, because I think we kind of thought that in the offseason New Orleans was going to find a deal for him, but it was much tougher to find a deal for him than I think a lot of people, probably including New Orleans, anticipated,
Hmm.
and it still hasn't happened. And you know, I don't know. Like, if they don't give him an extension, does he just walk? I mean, there's not a lot of teams with cap space, but something's got to give at this point, right? Where like either somebody finds, a deal for him, the New Orleans finds a deal for him that both sides are okay with, or he just goes. But again, I don't know what the likelihood of him walking is because again, not a lot of teams have cap space. So I would think he would prefer a trade and then, get re-signed in the offseason. But I don't know. Does he even end up getting the 200 plus million that he was looking for? I'm not sure, right? And it's not even that he's not good because he is a good player. It just again, it feels like in this new CBA era, a team may just not be willing to give him what he's looking for. But what do you think in terms of like what's going on here?
Yeah, I think in all reality, he probably wants to stay in New Orleans. I think everybody can kind of gather that. It's just a matter of like, what does their future hold? Do you really want to move on? Yeah, exactly. So it's like, you know, does he? Do the Pelicans really want to invest more money into that duo? Because I think Zion is another part of that. I guess duo that, you kind of need to mention when you talk about Brandon Ingram because of all the injuries that they've had and the lack of, playing time that we've seen them really have together every single year. So I think the ball is probably in New Orleans court. And I just don't know what kind of deal they could possibly make, because obviously he wants to be taken care of, but then New Orleans doesn't want to, handicap themselves for a team that might not even do anything because everybody's going to be hurt. So that's the real issue here. But I really don't know. I think it's one of the toughest things to talk about because there's so many unknowns, and it's like
Yeah.
there's also so many things working in the other direction on both sides. Like, and also, who else wants him? That's another thing. Who else really wants Brandon Ingram? Because I think if somebody would have wanted him, it would have been done in the offseason.
Yeah, I don't know if he wants to stay in New Orleans, just given like what's happened over the last, stretch of time. But I think the tougher part is, again, who wants him and who's willing to give up something to get him. Because right now it feels like if you're a team, you're kind of hoping that you can get him at a discount as opposed to at a premium because he is good. It's just, and obviously, like, there's still concerns, right? Like, again, not an elite defender. Not an amazing 3-point shooter. Although, to his credit, I know he is taking, more threes, and it's not like he's shooting that bad. He's shooting 36% on threes, which I think is a little down from earlier in the season, but he's taken 7 in a game. So he's taking, so he's kind of doing, at least offensively, more of what you want him to do, right? So he's taking more threes and still making them at a solid clip, right? He's actually shooting better than he did last season from 3. So that's what you want. You want him to kind of be more of a guy that isn't necessarily always just like an on-ball scorer because, if he can make, an average percentage from 3 on that many attempts, that'll make him easier to fit in on a lot of teams because then that'll allow you to have possessions where he doesn't need to have the ball. Which again, you don't always need because I think it's probably going to be tough, for your team to be really, really good if he's kind of like the main guy that has the ball in his hands. And it's not even that he's bad at it. He's good at it. It's just, like we talked about, say, and it's not going to happen, I don't think, but say like a team like Cleveland, right? Like there's going to be times where like, yeah, if you're going to play with those guys, you're not always going to have the ball in your hands, right? Like the ball is going to be sometimes in Mitchell or Garland's hands or whomever. But at the end of the day, what team, should make the call, because because there's not really any teams that are rumored to be chasing after him right now, right? That's, obviously like fans have kind of been speculating, about different things about, oh, does this mean he might go, somewhere X, Y, and Z? But, like, is there a team you'd like to see him go to? Or is there like, certain types of teams where it would make more sense to deal for him? Because again, we talked about it, like, it's not easy to come up with a trade package for this guy because of the combination of the contract, then what team needs a wing, and then more than likely has, some type of big or some type of other player that New Orleans would want. I don't know. And it's tough for New Orleans because they've had an awful season. That's the other part that compounds it is that they're 4-17. They've lost 8 in a row, and they're right at the bottom of the conference in the West, right? They're one of the worst teams in the NBA. And so much of that is because almost every one of their main rotational guys has been hurt at some point. Even Ingram has missed a few games here and there. But just regardless, it's been a nightmarish season for them. I think the questions could be easier to answer if the team was healthy, say he was playing well and they were winning, then at least you could buy some time and kind of like, figure out like what we're going to do or maybe come to the conclusion maybe we don't trade him. But, with the team being as so horrible, you haven't even really gotten an opportunity to evaluate what you even have. But regardless, you know, I don't really think that there's a whole lot they can do to kind of get back in this. And we still don't even know when Zion's going to come back, if he even comes back at all at this point. So just like a pretty much terrible Philly-esque nightmarish season for the Pelicans. And I don't really know where this goes. Like you could tell me that, they find a trade in the 11th hour and they end up not really getting a whole lot back for him. You could tell me that maybe he swaps teams with some other guy, or you could tell me he just doesn't get traded and then this goes all the way into the summer. I don't know. I don't even, I don't have, a good grasp of what they're doing over there, but, it just not a lot, not really anything good going on in New Orleans right now, other than I guess, Yves Missi has been, a good rookie this year. But outside of that, I mean, what can you really point to that's gone well for them? Nothing.
Yeah, they've just been all over the place. I would say teams that Brandon Ingram could potentially go to, maybe the Clippers, maybe Detroit, and I'm just gonna throw Memphis out there. I mean, I don't know. Like there's those are kind of teams that I would probably want him to be on more so.
Mhm.
Then they'll actually make those moves, but that's kind of my logic around it. I think a team that kind of needs another scoring option.
Like
That's
if,
kind of how I
yeah,
feel about it.
like if you're Detroit, like do you maybe like move a couple of those younger ish guys and then kind of swap them for Ingram or something like
Yeah,
that?
that's what
Or
I
like
was
if you're,
thinking.
or like if you're Memphis, move some of those guys and like get a more of a scoring wing or something out there.
Yeah, exactly. Like kind of guys to complement your franchise guy. Like, you want to put Cade Cunningham in the best position to succeed. I think the Memphis Grizzlies have done that pretty well with Ja Morant, but I think they could
Yeah.
take that a step further by adding a guy like Brandon Ingram because I think he would complement the game pretty well. Um, and yeah, that's kind of and the Clippers. They're just desperate, so nothing surprises me.
Yeah. So, we'll see where the Brandon Ingram situation goes, but I doubt it really gets solved anytime soon. Like, I know he changed his agent, and, I feel like he probably doesn't want to be there anymore, but, there's nothing can really happen right now until, a team knocks and gives an offer, and then New Orleans likes it as well, and then they agree. Like, there's just not really anything that can really happen as of right now,
Yeah,
but just wild situation, right? That kind of goes all the way back to again, remember last season, right? Where guys are hurt. He has a bad series against OKC, and then there's a bunch of rumors about trading him, and then it just kind of escalates from there, right? Where he doesn't show up to I think their camp before training camp, something like that. And then, he's been a good soldier. He's played, he shot threes, but I mean, you can just kind of tell that like not a lot is going right over there. So, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on the teams that we discussed. Let us know your thoughts on the Cup, the Brandon Ingram situation. And again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as well. If you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning of the video. Help our channel grow. And we'll see you in the next episode.